Now, welcome to another edition of News from Naboo with Horse Lighting Takes. And let's get right to the news.
Alright. Well, I do occasionally delve into Star Wars news. It's kind of my thing.
Occasionally, like daily.
Occasionally, yes. And there have been some questions that I've seen popping up around the internet about the kinds of projects Dave Filoni would and would not like, / maybe back, in his new position.
Assuming he has that power. We don't
Well, as
really
the
know.
chief creative officer, he's going to get to see things much earlier in the
Yes,
creative process,
that we
which
know.
means if he doesn't like them, he's going to have a voice.
Well, that's what we assume, right? We assume he's going to be looking at scripts, working with creators very
Kind of
early
feel
in the
like
process
he's
and being able
getting
to say
groomed to take Kennedy's position eventually.
no. I mean, that's hard to say because he doesn't have like a background in... no offense, I'm not trying to talk crap about Dave Filoni in this respect, but he doesn't have sort of the experience for that.
But his voice is
for all we know,
going to be
he's-
heard.
Yeah, but for all we know, after 15 years, he could run Lucasfilm just fine. I have no idea what his experiences look like. I'm simply saying that's kind of a stretch, but maybe not.
But I'm talking about the kinds of things he'd be more interested in backing. Maybe what kind of influences he would bring to these types of programs.
Sure, I think he's going to have a lot of influence going forward. And I do think once Kennedy is gone that there is a chance he is the man for the job. I don't know. That's
Well,
a possibility.
One thing that's really curious is, would Filoni have been interested in something like Andor? We know Andor enriched Star Wars in many ways. It was like a breath of fresh air, honestly. We also know that part of the reason Andor was pretty much made in the first place is because Kathleen Kennedy actually had a strong desire to work with Tony Gilroy again because they did have past history.
Yeah. So are you asking if Andor happens if Dave Filoni is in charge?
Well,
Or if he doesn't, if he would have
in
looked at
hindsight,
that and said, "Nah, that's not what Star Wars
would
is."
he look at it and say, this doesn't feel enough like Star Wars, this doesn't, it doesn't carry the same cadence as The Mandalorian, as the Ahsoka series,
No.
as the Book of Boba Fett. It stands on its own by itself.
Yeah.
It is both Star Wars and not Star Wars in a sense.
Well, it is Star Wars. I get what you're trying to say. It's not what you're maybe traditionally used to
But
of
as
Star
the
Wars.
chief creative officer, do you
Would he
think
have
he
shot
would
it
have
down?
been wanting a show like this?
I don't know. I mean, that's we are assuming a lot of Dave Filoni, I think.
It's hard to say.
Well, I mean, just everybody seems to be assuming a lot of Filoni both ways. Both the people who are very negative against him or very positive are just assuming, like, oh, when something good happens at Lucasfilm over the last whatever years or with Clone Wars, like, oh, that was Dave Filoni. Or when something bad has happened or something you didn't like, oh, that was Dave Filoni. Like, and I did a video on this the other day. Like, it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? Like, I'm sure Dave Filoni's had some good ideas. He's had some bad ideas. He's taken ideas from others and so on. So it's hard to say what this will look like for a while yet. The next couple shows coming out and stuff will not have been quote-unquote influenced unless he has been in charge more than we know.
One thing that's interesting to note is Pablo Hidalgo talked about, George Lucas. Would George Lucas have made Andor? Would George Lucas have backed the Andor project? Pablo said THX George would have 100% made Andor. He also really liked Andor himself, Pablo.
Really?
Yes.
I
But do
haven't
you
heard
agree
much
that
from
you think
Pablo
that
lately.
THX George would have been all in on Andor?
Probably. I don't see why George wanted to do different things with Star Wars. That's kind of what his biggest
think
critique
he
with
would have
the
approved
sequels
this.
was like, yeah, you did nothing new. I think he would have been on board with that.
Pablo Hidalgo actually talks on social media quite a bit about Andor. He was at the time. He really liked Andor. He
Wow.
was a fan. It's interesting to note because, like you said, we don't hear much from Pablo.
No, we really don't. Like, he is like the story group guy. He has, I mean, he writes a lot of the books. He does a lot of things, and yet I don't know if you've just been silencing him on this channel, but we really haven't heard much news from him as of late.
He thinks that George would have absolutely loved to do something like this. He said, as having been privileged to see old, unproduced live-action TV scripts, yes, indeed. He's all on thinking that George would have loved Andor.
I think so. Didn't he praise Andor? I thought he came out and said something about Andor not long ago.
I
that
think he
liked it.
did. I think he did.
I mean, I know he's probably kind of obligated, somewhere in the contract he can't crap talk Star Wars here after the fact or say that's not what I would have done. But I kind of remember him saying, or Tony Gilroy had a conversation with him and something about that he actually really enjoyed Andor.
But what's almost more concerning is this High Republic stuff that they want to do in live action, The Acolyte. Do you think Dave Filoni is interested in anything outside of the like Phantom Menace, Rise of Skywalker timeline to go to this brand new sections of time? How far back do you think that Dave Filoni wants to go? I mean, he did work on a lot of the Clone Wars, so he knows what it's like to have a lot of Jedi running around on
Sure, yeah.
in a project all at once. So do you think he would be against maybe something like The Acolyte?
I don't know. Again, we make a lot of assumptions about Filoni. Like the assumption, like he loves his characters too much, and
He does love his characters
he's going to
a
put
lot.
Ahsoka. I'm not kind of arguing against that per se, but there's this belief, like, oh, everything's going to be Ahsoka now. Everything is going to be the way Dave. I don't know. Like, we don't know.
No, he gets to have creative say on things, is my kind of understanding.
Yeah.
He's going to see projects a lot earlier in the conception phase
Yeah.
to input things and thoughts and ideas. We don't,
I don't
know
what
exactly.
I don't know what
more
his
than
scope
that.
looks like. I don't know what he's thinking. Right. If he does have kind of the power now, right?
Part of the problem is I don't believe that Dave really cares about book comic canon, which
No,
is
he doesn't.
entirely the High Republic.
Well,
and
until
Acolyte is
yeah.
High Republic.
No, I don't think he really sees that as the same level. He had those comments not long ago that Sam Witwer kind of told us about, that it's all tall tales. It doesn't have to be consistent, and it's good if it isn't. So by the fact that he has retconned many things from books and comics, and I mean just flat out too, not like, oh, he tweaked it a little or changed some things. Like Kanan's origin from the comics is very different than what we got in Bad Batch. So I don't really think he cares too much about the books and comics.
What the understanding with Dave Filoni's position is right now, though, is that he will have power to shut down future and undeveloped plans exploring different stories. So he may indeed be able to figure out that he doesn't want to do anything in the High Republic era. Let's get rid of the High Republic era. Let's concentrate more on the post-original trilogy era up to the sequels.
Yeah, I mean, the High Republic era is... I mean, I know there are people who really enjoy it, and I'm someone who's kind of been on the fence with it. It's not bad. It's not great. I don't think it's... I don't think the books have been selling. The comics have been selling particularly well. The numbers that we've seen have been pretty dismal.
Honestly, my assumption on that is because there is no live action or movie to back it up.
No, I agree with that.
Why am I interested in this era? There's just books and comics. This isn't live action Star Wars.
No, I agree.
Without live action Star Wars or even an animated show backing it, why does anyone care?
They would have been much better off trying to launch it with a movie or a television series or something, instead of just, here's some books and comics, because let's be real about it. Like 95% of the fan base probably doesn't actually read the books and comics. That's kind of a smaller market you got there. So having an entire era based just in these is not going to be that exciting for a lot of people.
Well, let's move on to another article I found. Star Wars Rebels voice actress Vanessa Marshall, who voiced Hera in Star Wars Rebels, has expressed a desire to portray Mara Jade in live action. She got to talk to Collider during a fan expo in San Francisco, where she was asked if she wants to be part of Dave Filoni's ever-expanding projects. She responded by bringing up Mara Jade from Legends. She said, "I would love to play Mara Jade. Can you call Dave Filoni and just let him know that I'd love to play Mara Jade? I think we would all just like to be in live action in some way. We haven't had the opportunity to do it yet, but my background is live action."
Interesting. I think my biggest issue right off the top is I'm going to hear Hera.
Unless she created that voice. That might not be her voice. It might just be the voice she portrayed.
We've seen her at conventions and stuff. I
don't remember what her voice sounds like.
It's a little different from her normal voice.
Well,
but
she's a little older than she was when she voiced Hera as well.
True. Well, speaking of that, I mean, Mara, she's got to be in her 50s, right?
54.
Mara Jade, I mean, depending on where in the timeline you're planning on taking her, and, she does... Well, in
right,
Legends,
if you're in the Filoni-verse, you're
killed,
close to Luke's age at this point.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of getting at.
Which
like
means
Luke
what,
would be
30s?
Luke would be late 20s, 30, depending on where exactly you are in the Mandoverse, I suppose. So, I mean,
yeah.
I hate to be that guy who
doable,
says she's
though.
too old to do that, because that sounds horrible. But I mean,
hey, Bo looks really good for being in her 70s, 80s.
Sure. Like it's that conundrum. Like, I'd love to see Mara Jade in Star Wars in live action, but I don't want to see her ruined, and I don't know that we even have room for her real story anymore. You'd have to
What?
do something different with her,
You
considering.
mean you can't figure out how to work in that she was an assassin of Palpatine's and then was Luke's wife?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that latter one that's more difficult.
I mean, she was featured prominently, Mara Jade, of course, in the Thrawn trilogy books.
Yep.
The original books were all Mara Jade and Luke. It was great.
Well, not all, but yes, it was a lot
good
of that. No, not just the good parts. That whole trilogy is pretty solid. But no,
So
I mean,
I agree that it might be difficult to bring in Mara Jade.
no, I think it's very hard.
And it might be even harder to bring in this actress, depending on...
Yeah.
She said her background is live action, and...
Hey, if it means getting a good version of Mara Jade, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
But again, keywords they're good, and you do have the problem of how would you even go about that story anymore?
Well, it's nice that it's more than just the fans wanting this character, that we're hearing from people who are a little more vocal, a little more of
Sure.
a voice within the Star Wars community, reminding people, hey, this character exists, and it's really good. Just don't tell him about Revan. He doesn't need to touch that.
No. But I mean, the idea you bring in Mara Jade, and is she part of the reason for Luke's grumpiness and giving up on the Jedi? I mean, possibly. In Legends, he does have a meltdown, you could say, when Mara dies, so it's...
What if we find out that Kylo Ren killed her?
Yeah, that's where I'm going with it,
I
but
know.
isn't that called, like, fridging, where you... I forget,
Well,
don't we have a
we're
term
not-
for that now,
yes,
where you
it is
bring in, like, a
fridging,
female
but we aren't
character?
bringing
and-
her in just for that.
Well, it
That
sounds
just
like we are,
helps
though.
fix the story. Too.
Yeah, but that feels like the main purpose of bringing her in.
No,
would
the
be
main
to
purpose
fix
is to
that.
find their romance and the
Well, sure,
fighting Thrawn and
You're going to have people who would reject it just for that, though.
What
just
if they
because they
never
think it's
mention
being
it?
used. Well, we have to mention it. We have to figure it out, because when the sequels roll around, she's not around and Luke's on an island, and
yeah. That is a problem, but
it's a problem.
it happened in the... It's not like it didn't happen in the books, too, where she died.
Yeah, she's
And that it just made him very distraught.
very distraught, yes.
It's just following source material? So it's not fridging?
Well, sure.
I mean, she exists, and that's just the part of the role she told in the story. It's not her whole role. Her whole life didn't
No,
revolve
I-
around, I must die so Luke can be upset.
No, but
This isn't the Wheel of Time.
what I'm saying is there would certainly be people who will look at it that way. Like, oh, you're only going to use her to explain this thing I don't like. Which, yeah, I get why you'd be frustrated with that. Yet at the same time, could that be a good excuse?
Yes.
Yeah, it would be. Could we still get a good story with Mara Jade and Luke? Potentially.
Yes.
Would you like to see that in live action? Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to see a
Bring it on.
good story with those two.
That's all
But-
the news I got, though, this
Yeah, all right. Well,
day.
in that case, then, that's all we got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below. Tell us what you think about Mara Jade. Would you like to see her brought into the Mandoverse? Would you like to see her played by Vanessa Marshall? Or maybe somebody else? Whatever the case may be, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.